You are listening to the Ready PDM Network.
Ready Product Radio is brought to you by Under 10 Consulting. For many organizations, it seems products get released by individual heroics. Yet most organizations need a small number of living documents, fewer than 10, to manage their products and services. Under 10 gives you a minimal process with brief artifacts, simple templates, and ready-to-use worksheets. If your product team is struggling to get products into the marketplace, you'll want to talk to Under 10 Consulting. Get a product playbook designed specifically for your organization.
Are you ready?
Price at which the quantity supplied is equal to the quantity demanded.
Are you? Don't you love to negotiate? Now you're negotiating.
Prices. This one is a little more expensive. We'll know where that extra money went.
He's got 55.
We value what you do, but this rate is unreasonable.
How much would you pay for a knife like this? How much would you pay for all these items? Now how much would you pay?
The price is right.
Seems like everybody's got a price.
Are you ready?
Mark Stiving, welcome to Ready Product Radio. I know you as a member of the Pragmatic Marketing team and an expert in pricing, but do you mind giving our audience a brief introduction of yourself?
Sure, let's make it really brief though. How about I started my life as an electrical engineer, became a salesperson, wasn't all that great, decided to go back to school and got an MBA at Santa Clara University in California. Fell in love with going to school, and so I ended up getting a PhD in marketing from Berkeley. After the degree in marketing, I went back to Ohio State and I taught there for 4 years. I left that and started a company, sold my company. And from that point forward, I was really working with companies mostly on pricing issues and product issues. And about 3 years ago now, I joined Pragmatic Marketing.
Excellent, excellent. So let's talk about, first just get into the topic here. What are some of the biggest pricing mistakes that you see product people make? Because I know you guys at Pragmatic talk to a lot of product-focused people. What are some of the common mistakes that you see people making?
Yeah, there are a lot of mistakes we see. If we just talk about product people for a second, it's probably they don't think they have enough control over pricing. But as a company, before we get to product people, I would say it's people way overemphasize the importance of cost in setting pricing.
Okay.
Because it turns out cost is almost completely irrelevant to what price we want to charge.
Okay.
That is such a hard concept for people to get a hold of when they're first learning how to price, when they're trying to set prices. And even when I teach pricing classes, we have people in class that will argue with me for the first half hour or hour over that one issue because it's so ingrained in our heads.
Mm-hmm.
Then throughout the day, people will toss out, well, we charge a higher price because it costs more. It's like, no, that's not why we charge a higher price. We charge a higher price because people are willing to pay more. And that's what we always think about when we're setting pricing is how much is somebody willing to pay.
Right. And your costs are kind of irrelevant in that equation is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay. So then you mentioned product people specifically and not feeling they have a sense of control over pricing. So why don't you talk about that a little bit then?
I think as product people think about what their roles are and what they should be doing, they don't often see themselves as truly the president of their own product or the CEO of their own product. And we always coach them to try to take that attitude. And when you don't have that attitude, then you don't think you control pricing. Finance tells you what the pricing margin should be, and so we set pricing that way. Or sales is telling you it has to be this price, and so we set pricing that way. And in truth, the product people are the people who have more knowledge than anyone else about what the market needs, what the market wants, what the market's willing to pay for the product. Mm-hmm. So in truth, product ought to be the guys leading pricing, but usually they don't. I don't see them standing up that often to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So let's say you're coaching a new product team and they're launching, let's say, a SaaS-based product. What are some of the key pieces of advice? Like, what are some of the basic steps you suggest they go through to determine if it's not cost-based? Then how do you determine what the price should actually be?
Really, really good question, and it depends on what type of product it is. when I say the type of product, I want to bifurcate products into two chunks for a second. The first one is what I'll call a will-I type product. And so this is a product where when you sell it, you don't really have competition. When I think about that, most things Apple makes, I put in the will-I category, especially when the Apple iPhone first came out. That was absolutely a will-I product. There wasn't anything else for people to compare it to. And probably people buying Apple Watches today aren't saying, gee, am I going to buy an Apple Watch or an Android watch? They're saying, am I going to buy an Apple Watch or not? Mm-hmm. And so when there's no competition, it's actually really hard to set prices. That's the hardest time of all to set pricing. But what we're trying to do at that point in time in the B2B world is figure out how much value our product gives to our customer. So if we can figure that out in terms of how much more profit they're going to make, how much money they're going to save, an actual dollar value, we should get a percentage of that dollar value. And that should be in the ballpark at 10% is usually what we get as a rule of thumb. I've seen work in many, many different industries. But that's rare. Those are revolutionary new products. There's no competition. Most of the time we have competition. Mm-hmm. And now when you ask, how do we set a price? It has to be relative to our competitors. The question I always ask is, are your products better than your competitors? And if the answer is yes, you ought to be charging a higher price. Mm. If the answer is no, I don't know how you can win if you charge the same price as your competition. What we're really trying to do at this point is figure out when our customers are making decisions between us and a competitor, how are they making that decision? And they're making that decision based on what are the different features, capabilities, and what's that worth to me as a customer. And so we're trying to put a dollar value on the differentiation between our products and our competitors' products. In the end, we have to price relative to our competition, but we ought to be getting more as we build more differentiation into our products.
Mm-hmm. So there's a couple of things I think you touch on there that are kind of core product pieces, which is, I assume you mean value in the eyes of your target customer, or better in the eyes of your target customer, because obviously everybody probably thinks their product is better. And the other piece that you're touching on is competitive knowledge or competitive intelligence. So are those kind of valid precursors to even getting into a pricing thought exercise?
Absolutely. In fact, your first point, I love that one, because what typically happens is marketers, product managers, we know our product so well, and we know what our advantages are, and we are really good at listing all of our advantages, and we are not very good at knowing what our disadvantages are. Mm. And so we have to make a special effort to go figure that out. And what I usually advise people is go talk to your salespeople. Your salespeople have a good idea of what your competitors' advantages are over you because they hear them often. Mm-hmm.
That's good. So maybe would you be able to come up with an example of a company or product that you think really does like an A+ job on pricing, like a kind of gold standard, let's say in the B2B software space, if possible?
B2B software is always hard because it's not examples that all people relate to.
Yeah. Okay. So how about in the consumer space then? Yeah.
We straddle the field then. A
okay.
company that does a phenomenal job is LinkedIn. You could go to LinkedIn and look at their pricing, and the reason I do think they do such a phenomenal job is they've created product portfolios. They've done product segmentation. They have 4 different personas they've identified. They do good, better, best for each one of those personas. And they've done a really nice job at all of the things that I think are important in strategic pricing. Now, I'd say LinkedIn is really a will-I type product. People don't say, am I going to buy LinkedIn or am I going to buy somebody else's? It's always just LinkedIn. And so they don't have to chase their competitive pricing that much, if at all. As a general rule, most companies do a good job at pricing. And I only say that because they're still around. Mm-hmm. Now, could they get more? Absolutely. The companies that do the best are the companies that are doing the things I just described in LinkedIn. Even if you have competition, you should be able to say, what are my different market segments? How much are these different market segments willing to pay? And how do I get more money from them? Right. We often think about the airline industry. You have people that are willing to pay first class and people that are willing to to not play first class. And in the old days, I don't know if they do this anymore, but they used to say, are you going to have a Saturday night stay or not? And so that was their way to segment vacation travelers from business travelers.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I remember that. So that's good. What about on the flip side, Mark? Like, what are some of the key things that mistakes, I guess, that you see people making? And if I was to make a list of things not to do on the flip side, and maybe that's a whole discussion in itself, but is there a handful that you can point to?
There's a very long list, but started off. I want to go back to the one I mentioned earlier today on costs.
Okay.
Almost every software company does the following. They take all of their development costs, they add that up, and they say, we think we're going to sell 1,000 units this year. So they take their development cost, they divide by 1,000, and they say, that's our cost per unit sold. That is nowhere near accurate, because the true cost, the marginal cost of the next unit sold, is usually zero when we talk about software.
Mm-hmm.
And when we think that way, we make really bad pricing decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Because what we want to do is not think that way. We want to think based on how much is my market willing to pay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's got to be the single biggest thing I see software companies do that really bother me.
Mm-hmm.
Other things you see them do, they use this rule I call set it and forget it.
Mm-hmm.
It was so hard to set the price the first time, they never want to have that meeting again, so they never read their pricing. But it turns out markets change and customers change and competitors change and technologies change. And so we have to go revisit that pricing on a regular basis to make sure that we're not outdated, that we're still playing in the space properly.
So in the software arena, how often do you think you can get away? Because I could see, as a customer, for example, if somebody's changing their price on, let's say, my favorite software every year, I'm going to get a little agitated. What do you think makes sense in terms of? Obviously, it depends on market, but every 2 years, is that a good general?
So let's be clear. Most of the time, if you're buying software and the price changes, the price is probably going down.
Mm.
And the reason for that is competition came in, they're stealing business, etc. However, one of the things I often teach people is you don't have to raise price. If you're going to raise prices, you don't have to raise prices on everybody. If you're currently a subscriber to a SaaS type product and that company decides they want to raise prices, they don't have to raise prices on you, because raising prices on you upsets you.
Mm-hmm.
You can raise prices, and any new customers that come in, they're now winning new business at higher prices.
Mm-hmm.
They've done that without upsetting any of their marketplace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. So how next question I have for you is how early in the product definition cycle do you think you should look at pricing? So let's say I'm part of a product team. We're building out, might be a new product, might be an entirely new feature set. How early do you think I should be looking at pricing? Should it be something that's done after I've fully baked the product, or is it something that should start at the beginning? Where do you think that discussion and thought process should start?
Since we're here in presidential election times, I'm tempted to use a voting line. We should be doing pricing early and often.
That makes sense.
So we have to do it early. The first question I would like to know is, do we want to put money into developing this project, this product, whatever it happens to be? And the only way I know the answer to that question is if I have an estimate on what my returns are going to be, what my revenue is going to be. And I can only do that if I know how many am I going to sell and what the price is going to be. It doesn't have to be precise, but we have to have a really good ballpark. And we have to have good justification for why we believe that to be the case. So we should be pricing clear up in that business plan stage before we ever start coding or start developing. And then as we go through, maybe nothing changes, everything's static, but we just learn more during the process of building. Maybe we create more ideas that add more value to the marketplace. And so we ought to be revisiting that. But what's going to be happening is as we're developing, things in the marketplace are changing, competitors are changing, And so when we go to release, odds are good the price is not going to be the same as we thought it was when we started the project.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you basically you're suggesting there that you kind of recheck and refine at that point?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
We want to launch with the optimal pricing as opposed to just sticking with what we had in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. So next I'd like to talk, Mark, what about, like, is pricing a tool that product people should think of as being a tactic, or is it a strategic tool, or do you see it playing a role in both tactical and strategic discussions? Can you give me some comments on whether you believe it to be primarily a tactical aspect or a strategic aspect of the product strategy?
So, Alan, I think pricing should be strategic way more than it's tactical. But I think pricing is tactical way more than it's strategic. And here's what I mean when I say those two things. On the tactical side, usually we think of tactical as, should I raise or lower my prices? Should I accept this deal or not? How do I negotiate with my sales force to get them to sell the product at the price we want? And I think of these as all very tactical things that we deal with as a product team a lot. On a very strategic side, though, is once you understand pricing, when you understand how your marketplace uses price to make a decision between and amongst your product portfolio and your competitors' product portfolios, then you start to use pricing to help you formulate your product portfolio. For example, if you're targeting different market segments, and what I see companies do all the time right now is they build software applications that are configurable so anybody can use it. And what we're essentially saying is, here, I've got these 20 different market segments. I want all of them to be able to use my one thing. All you have to do is reconfigure it. There are some of those market segments that would pay 5 times as much if we had that tweaked for their purposes, and some market segments that would still buy it, that might buy more if it were half the price, whatever it was that we were charging. And we should be looking at those specific market segments and seeing what their willingness to pay is, and how do we build the product portfolio so that we capture the right willingness to pay from those different market segments. Inside the market segments, now we start talking about how do we segment pricing inside the market segment, because some people in that segment are willing to pay us a lot. Some people in that segment are only willing to pay us a little. There are things we can do so that we can capture that willingness to pay once we're inside a market segment.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, but let me just make sure I understand. So you're basically saying it shouldn't be one size fit all. You should do market segmentation. It's okay if the price structure is different in those different segments. I'm assuming that's because those people across those different segments probably don't talk to each other. So, for example, if tier 1 banks are one of my market segments, I probably have to have a consistent pricing structure there. But if I'm also serving community credit unions, then maybe that can be a completely different pricing structure, because those groups of target customers aren't going to talk to each other. Would that be fair?
So I'm with you, except for relying on customers not talking to each other.
Okay.
I think as a general rule, they don't talk to each other. They won't share prices with each other, so you're probably okay with that. But what I usually recommend, when you've got these large disparities in willingness to pay between, say, tier 1 banks and credit unions, what we can do is we can create 2 different products. And one product, in general, it might be the exact same thing with little tweaks to product features or who has access to what or how it's skinned, just little tweaks to things. And by having different products, different part numbers, we charge different prices.
Good. That way, even if they did talk, we're talking about apples and oranges, so of course they're priced differently. Now, so the next thing that I want to get into. So, how do I? Let's say I've got a really good, clear sense of my segment, and most of my stuff's in banking. So let's just say I'm going after tier 1 banks. Now, how do I go about finding out what the best price is in terms of something that's going to, be competitive, have enough margin that I can, afford to do the product, and not price myself out of the market? Like, how do you go about actually finding that sweet spot?
It really falls back. I think you're essentially asking the same question you asked earlier, so I'm going to answer it very similarly.
Okay.
We're going to go out and we're going to find out, let's assume we're about to build a new product. We're going to go out and we're going to find out who's building an equivalent or similar product today. And so there's some company out there that's building that product and they're selling it for $120,000. And we say, well, what's wrong with that product? Or what are they not doing well? What are we going to do well in our product that's better than that? And are we going to be able to do at least everything they do that's important? And we find out that we do a lot more than they do. We talk to our banks now. The questions is this really valuable to you or not? And we want to try to discern how valuable it is to them relative to our competitor's product. So if we've got new features that we could walk into the bank and we could say, hey, this is going to save you $1 million a year because you have this capability, then we're going to get a big chunk of that back in our price. And that chunk is above and beyond the $125,000 they were paying for our competitors. You take $125K for your competitors plus some portion of that $1 million that we're going to save the bank. And that goes in our pocket.
So you're basically referring to, and I see this a lot, kind of the 10X. So if I'm solving $1 million problem, I should be able to charge about $100K for that and offer a really good return for my customer. Is that kind of the thinking?
That's the thinking, but remember that only applies when there isn't competition.
Right.
The moment my competitor comes out with that same capability, and they drop their price way below ours, no longer matters how much we're saving the company. It matters they have a choice between us and our competitors. We have to be price competitive with our competitors.
And I know from reading some of your blogs that even though you're quote unquote a pricing guy, that you would probably caution against racing to the bottom. In other words, getting into a panic and using price as your only differentiator at that point, right? I think from reading some of your stuff, you on the contrary, you'd actually say, if that's the spiral that you're in, you're probably not differentiating yourself well enough. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. So the two things you're doing wrong is you're not differentiating and you're not picking a market segment.
Right.
So if you find yourself competing on price, go heading down to the bottom, well, you have to step back and say, look, there are people who are willing to pay for my capabilities. I'm going to find those people and serve those people because I don't want to charge as low as possible. The other thing that ends up happening, it's kind of interesting. If we choose to use price to gain market share and we lower our price, our competitors are going to follow. So they're going to, we're just going to hurt industry profits. Nobody makes more money. Oftentimes the opposite of that is true as well. Oftentimes, if we're willing to take a chance and raise our prices, our competitors will follow there. And so it's a chance for us to raise industry profits. Now, let me emphasize, you may never, ever, ever go talk to your competitors about price.
Right. That's collusion.
You will go to jail.
Yeah.
Right? But there's nothing wrong with testing it and seeing if they follow. Yeah.
Rising tide floats all boats kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's good. So Mark, what I certainly noticed in my years of experience in products and technology products, pricing is an area where there's not a lot of information. What resources can you think of? And I know you've written a book or maybe a couple on the subject, but what resources would you suggest for somebody that's involved either as a product manager, product marketer, business development, even entrepreneurs, single person startups? What resources would you suggest that people can look to learn more about pricing?
So I hate to plug my book, but I'll just say that my book
please do. Yeah.
Really, really easy to read. It's out of print, so hopefully you can buy the digital version. It's called Impact Pricing, Your Blueprint for Driving Profits, but super easy to read, and it lays out most of the things we talked about here today in more detail. I write a blog, so people can go to our blog and get that. It's pragmaticpricing.com, published through my company, Pragmatic Marketing. And we also teach a pricing class. Pragmatic Marketing has a pricing class that's a class, very, very highly reviewed, so people love it who come to it. Besides that, pricing is becoming a bigger and bigger issue in companies nowadays. And so you start to find more resources. Not a lot. It's difficult, but you find more resources. And so if you did a search on some pricing books, you'll find some pretty good pricing books out there.
Okay.
But a lot of them are really technical. and you slog through them instead of breeze through them. So those are the ones I'd say I could tell you are really easy and an easy way to pick up pricing.
Yeah, good. That's excellent. Well, listen, I think we're running up on time here, Mark. So, what can you share with our audience if people want to follow you online, if they want to reach out to you, maybe with a specific question they have? What contact information are you comfortable sharing with the group here?
So I'll give several things. First off, for Twitter, feel free to follow my Twitter on @MarkStiving. I blog at Pragmatic Pricing. And if you send me an email, my email address is mstiving@pragmaticmarketing.com. And
Okay.
if you send me a question, typically what I'll do for the questions I like is I'll answer them in my blog. Now, urgent, I'll send you back an answer quickly, and then I'll put it in the queue for the blog, so when it's time to go up in the blog, it goes up there. But it gives me good blog material. It's more interesting for other people to read, and at the same time, I can answer interesting questions.
Yeah, for sure. And I assume if one person has the question, then probably many others do as well. So, Mark, I want to thank you for sharing the time today and being on Ready Product Radio. I know pricing is a really important topic, and not enough resources like you, quite frankly, out there. So I'm hoping in the future maybe you'll speak with us again and we can continue the discussion.
I'd love to.
Okay, good. Well, thanks a lot, Mark. Have a great day.
Thanks, Alan.
Today's podcast was brought to you by Under 10 Consulting. Get your product teams up to speed quickly with the latest methods and a proven process designed specifically for your organization. Under 10 Consulting. Manage the business of your products. Find Under 10 online at under10consulting.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of Ready Product Radio, part of the Ready PDM network. This is when most podcasters ask you to leave a review on iTunes if you like the show. My only request is if you found the show entertaining, inspiring, or informative, please share it with a colleague or friend who may feel the same way. Also, note that the views expressed in this episode do not necessarily reflect my views or the views of the Ready PDM network. If you want yourself or your product to be ready, then keep your eyes on your markets, your ears to your customers, your mind on their experiences, both good and bad, and finally, keep your hearts in your products. Until next time, thank you for listening. You can contact us on Twitter at Ready Product Radio. That's RDYPRODUCTRADIO. And on the web at www.readyproductradio.com.
Gee, mate, what do you want to do tonight?
The same thing we do every night, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
The following sound clips and samples were used in the intro and extra of this episode. All respective rights reserved by the owners of these. Are You Ready by DJ Darrow. Explanation of Equilibrium Price by Khan Academy. Don't You Love Negotiating? William Shatner Priceline ad. Friend Prices from the movie Pulp Fiction. Auctioneer Rhett Parks. This Rate is Unreasonable, Jack Donaghy from 30 Rock. How Much Would You Pay from 1980's Ginsu Knife ad. Price is Right TV show introduction. Everybody's Got a Price, singer Jesse. Are You Ready by DJ Bart. Are You Ready by Banassus. Pinky and the Brain television show, What Are We Going to Do Tonight, Wayne? Are You Still Here? Quote of Matthew Broderick from the end of the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Copyrights for these materials are the sole property of their respective holders and have been used here without permission and without profit.
You still here? It's over. Go home. Go.